I'm Leroy Odinga Perry, the pastor of St. Stephen's AME Zion Church here in the lovely town of Branford, Connecticut. I'm here today with Mr. James Johnson Jr., also known favorably as Dinky, and he is an outstanding member of this community, a trailblazer, and just an awesome Black African American who has a wonderful story that we want you to hear.
Let me say that I appreciate those comments you talked about. I was born in Waterbury, Connecticut. My mother and father met each other in Waterbury, but they were from the South. My mother grew up in a place called Georgia. My father grew up in a place called South Carolina. In fact, it was Camden, not too far from Columbia, South Carolina. But my mother was born in Hawkinsville, Georgia. They came to Waterbury to work in the factories during the war. I was born in 1932 when they had me. My mother had me at Waterbury Hospital in Waterbury, Connecticut. I grew up in Waterbury. I first went to Bishop Street School that went from kindergarten to 5th grade. Then I went to Driggs High School that started from 5th grade to 8th grade, where I graduated.
Oh, yes. This picture here.
Yes, and I like to mention that that was my first suit.
Wow.
Being from a family of 8 children, I had to work very hard to buy that suit. And that was my first suit. It was some case clothes.
In the black and white shoes?
And the black and white shoes.
Were the schools segregated at that time?
None of the schools were segregated in Waterbury. Bishop Street School, we lived on Bishop Street, and we had school not too far from us, but the surrounding parts of Waterbury, we had Jewish people on one side, and we had Italians on the other side. And we were sort of like in between. So everybody knew where everybody lived, and everybody knew where they could go and where they couldn't go. So we weren't really segregated.
And your parents worked in the factory?
Parents worked in the factory. Scobles. Scobles was considered one of the great factories in Connecticut at that time.
The Brass City.
Brass City of the world, Waterbury was known as. So it was a very, very wealthy town because everybody was working and everybody was doing well. And of course we had people from all parts of the South coming in. After I graduated from Driggs, I attended Leavenworth High School. The year we arrived there, Leavenworth had just won the New England Championship. And it was the first time that a team from Waterbury had ever won a championship of that nature. The following year, we decided, a friend of mine named Alexander Petaway and I went out for the team. And we were the first 2 blacks that were on the Leavenworth team. All the rest were white students. But we made the team. And of course they had lost their star players because they were seniors at the time when they won the championship. So we were there at the right time. And the 2 of us made the team. We played for 4 years. At the end of my 4th year, I received a scholarship from St. Paul's College. Thanks to my community center director, Wallace Hooker was the person in charge of the community center where we played basketball and all kinds of sports. He was the person that was influential in my attending St. Paul's with a scholarship.
Mr. Johnson, Was that the Q? Was he working at the Q House on
It
Pearl
was called
Street?
the Pearl Street Q House.
That was the place we all went to learn basketball, boxing, and we hung out there. So that's been a very important part of our history there in Waterbury. Oh, let me just go back to this basketball thing because I wanted to show a picture of you on the team. There's only 2 blacks in this picture. And it says that you were some ball player. It said you could hit the outside shot, you could dribble, and that you was a star athlete there at Leavenworth High School. You want to say anything about that?
Well, I was pretty good, but at the same time, number 14, Carl Pettaway, was excellent also. Right. So we had played against a lot of those fellows that are on the team, and against the championship team that they had the year before with Jimmy Pearsall. Jimmy Pearsall was one of the stars on that team, and he also ended up playing baseball for the Boston Red Sox.
Did you get a scholarship to go to St. Paul's?
Yes, Wallace Hooker, as I mentioned before, was the person that made it possible.
So you played how many sports at St. Paul?
Well, what happened, I went there on a basketball scholarship, but I didn't know that the community center director, Wallace, had told him that I could play football, but I didn't play football because we were more into basketball. And he had taught us how to swim. He had played tennis there with the neighborhood. He had played baseball. And so all those teams St. Paul had also, but they didn't have the athletes. So I ended up playing football, but I didn't know I was going to play the first game that was there when I arrived. I arrived on a Monday, and that Saturday, he said that he wanted me to dress up with the team so it would appear that we had a lot of players. So I had a lot of my basketball players just dressing, but maybe not playing in the game. So anyway, I had my new uniform put on, and that day that we had the game, and the announcer said, number 20 from Waterbury, Connecticut will start at right in. And of course that was me, and I was shocked. I really didn't know what was happening. But anyway, I ended up playing football also. And we used to watch Mr. Hooker and some of his friends in Waterbury play tennis. So I watched them, and they used to ask, come up, help move the ball, pick up the balls for us. So I learned the game just by watching them. So I knew how to play and how to hit, and he showed us how to use the racket and everything. So I ended up on the team at St. Paul's also, on the tennis team. So I ended up playing football, basketball, tennis, and I ran track.
Wow.
And I ran track only because my cousin, Marshall Emery, that lived in New Haven at the time, was a star track. He did the 440s. And so I used to, when I, on vacations, come down and watch him. I used to watch him work out, and then I used to run with him. So I picked up some of his habits. So the coach of the track team thought I could make it as a 440 man also. So I ended up running track.
You know, you mentioned once to me that when you graduated or when you finished the service, you had the opportunity of going to Howard University, School of Dentistry.
Right. When I was in college, during the war broke out.
And what happened?
And if you were in college at that time, you could take a test, and if you passed this test, you didn't have to go in. They would let you finish the school, and then you would go in. I was in my senior year at that time, and so at the end of my senior year, I had to go into the service. So I chose to go into the Air Force rather than into the Army. So in order to get into the Air Force, you had to go through flight school. And in order to get to flight school, they had to have at least 100 people, thinking that they were going to lose some of the students. And so they could never get to 100. So I was in the service, drafted. So they really didn't have any orders for me. So they sent me to the Air Force place up in Capri Falls, Massachusetts. That was near Springfield, Mass. I happened to be on the base one day and went into a place they call the Educational Center. And in the Educational Center on the base, they had a sign up there, teachers needed, in Springfield, Connecticut. That they would make arrangements for you, if you were accepted, to teach there and then come back on the base at night and do the rest of your work. Until the flight school was ready to be attended. Well, it never happened. I went there and they said, well, the only thing we can do is let you go down and teach. So that's what I did. I went down to Springfield. And when I arrived I talked with the superintendent of the schools, and he had been the superintendent when I first started teaching in New Hampshire.
Wow. I'm confused about one thing. When you were a senior at St. Paul, you were drafted?
No, I wasn't drafted. I had passed that test.
Oh, it was like ROTC or something like that?
No, it was a test that they gave to see how you were doing in college. It was just a regular test.
Were you going to go to become a airplane
That's what I
pilot?
had hoped for. That's why it was called a flight school.
Oh, wow.
But it never happened because we could never get 100 people.
But then after that, they gave you an opportunity to, like a GI Bill, to go to college or continue your education?
Right.
But you didn't have the money to go to Howard for the dentistry. You couldn't purchase the...
I couldn't purchase it at that time. I didn't have the money.
Wow.
Because in order to get into to the school, you had to buy these tools that they had. And the tools were in the thousands.
Wow.
That they use for dentistry.
I wanted to go back just a little bit prior to St. Paul to ask you about the work ethic that you had in Waterbury. It seems to me that we grew up at a time when our parents took great pride in work ethics. Getting a job, like I remember my first job was at Woolworths, and I'm told that when you grew up, Woolworths would not even allow black people to eat at the counter in Waterbury. But I'm also reminded of the story that you told me about how you went out and got your first job in Waterbury. You want to mention that to us?
Well, I started out in Waterbury shining shoes. And of course, this was during the war, 40s. The war broke out, and shoe shining was a good way to make money.
How much could you make a day?
Oh, I could make close to $5 or $6, which was a lot of money back in those days. But my first job was setting up pins in the bowling alley, called Seniors Bowling Alley, where we would pick up the pins. At those days didn't have the electrical things that they have today. We had just to pick up the pins and put them on the spots, and then the nails would go down and they would bowl.
Wow.
And so you had two alleys, so I used to sit in the middle of the two alleys, and when the ball would hit the deadwood, I had to get up, throw it off, and do it also on the other side. So that was my first job. But it used to pay good money. It used to pay 10 cents a string. And 10 cents a string at the end of the night, after they would bowl 4 or 5 games and they call up the string, 10 cents a string was a lot of money. So I'd have 50 strings.
Wow.
50 times 10. So to bring home $5 was a lot of money back in those days.
Did you go to church also in Waterbury?
I went to Mount Olive AME Zion Church.
And who was your pastor?
My first pastor, Reverend Miller.
Miller, right. Who became a bishop in the AME Zion Church.
Right.
I'm told that he was a very community-minded, outspoken minister. Many loved him in Waterbury. I think he's also a graduate of Livingstone College. And his 2 sons also went to Livingstone College.
Right, he was a great man. When I used to come home and attend church on Sunday, he would always acknowledge and would always ask me to say a few words about what was happening. And of course I had to thank them because they gave me a little money while I was there. They would send a little money down to me. So I had great respect for him.
I want to look at the school system in Waterbury and St. Paul, because at Leavenworth was a lot like Caner Tech in some ways, because you learned a number of trades that you said helped you through life, and then at St. Paul, those learning experiences were enhanced. Can you tell us about that?
Well, at Waterbury, at Leavenworth High School was a technical high school. Technical high school, we had woodworking, we had pattern making, we had machine shop, we had auto mechanics, we had all of the different trades. So it was like, when you graduated from Leavenworth High School, it was like having a remarkable skill. You could go into Scoville's, I could go into all different kinds of jobs. And we had, of all things, which I was excellent in, was mathematics. So we had just about every kind of math you could possibly have in high school. Logarithms, slide rules, we did everything that had to do with math. I had some good teachers. I had one teacher in science that helped develop the air conditioning. Mr. Senate was one of my excellent teachers also. He was the one that taught me pattern making. And the thing I always remember from a teacher came out of his teaching. When we did a project, if I brought it back and asked him to check out if it was sandpaper correctly, he would say, no, go and do it again. So I would go back and I would sandpaper again, come back and ask him. He said, no, it's not good enough, go back and do it again. And he would do that several times. So he said, if you don't like it, see that sign there? What does it say? And it says, once a job has begun, never leave it until it is done. Be thy labor great or small, do it right or not at all. So it was a lot of things that I learned also, not only from the school part, but from the people themselves, the teachers.
And at St. Paul, was that an enhancement of that learning taking place at St. Paul?
In a way it was, but most of it, as I said before, I had quite a bit of math at Leavenworth. So the things that we did at St. Paul were just more or less the same things that we had already done at Leavenworth.
Because there was 2 schools of thought at that time. One was the W.E.B. Du Bois Talented Tent and the other one was the Booker T. Washington. And Booker T. Washington said, we've got to learn how to do all of these things, how to grow and plant, how to build. And W.E.B. Du Bois was saying, yeah, but you need to also know math and science and history. And so that was the kind of conflict going on, I think, in black schools during that period of time that you were growing up. I think it's interesting to note that when you graduated, did you go into the service or did you go into teaching here in Connecticut?
I started in Connecticut in 1957.
Were you the first black teacher?
I was considered as the first black teacher that was teaching a major subject, mathematics. And that was at a junior high school in New Haven, Connecticut called Fairhaven Junior High.
And you taught algebra?
I taught algebra, and it was the first algebra class that was ever taught in a middle school.
Wow.
At the time.
And how did the conflict between you and the Black Panthers get started in New Haven?
Well, they had the riots in 1960 at Hill House High School. That's the first place where the Black Panthers had the riots, and all the kids came out of the school and they demonstrated in the park across from Hill House High School. And of course the police were called and everything. So I was teaching at Fairhaven Junior High School at the time when they had the riots. So they decided that they were going to ask me as a black teacher to go there as an administrative intern to sort of help quell all of the action that was taking place between the students and the Black Panther Party. I was told not to go by all of the teachers and all of the parents at the school I was teaching, but everybody aspires to be a principal. And this was more or less an opportunity also to become an administrator.
Oh, okay.
So I took that job. They called me an administrative intern. I was in charge of the freshman class. All the kids that became freshmen that were under my care. So that's how I began as an administrator. A lot of them were born right here in New Haven.
The Black Panthers?
Black Panthers.
Oh.
They were from New Haven.
Did you meet Huey P. Newton or Elvis Cleaver?
They were all in that, along with some of the people in New Haven. Of course, at that time, being in the position, I was in a bad position because I was an administrator to help the students, and at the same time, felt that some of the things that they were doing was also
good,
true.
Yeah.
But they called me Oreo cookie. They had all kinds of things that they were doing at that time.
Because you were working for the administration.
I was working for the administration and also trying to work with the students.
Right.
Now, in some cases, they were right. Students were not given the same opportunity, black students. They had different math classes for black kids at that time. They had Algebra A and Algebra B, which was considered just one course, but it was divided for 2 years that would give them what was required. Algebra A and Algebra B would give them the certification that they needed in order to graduate. They needed 2 courses. But Algebra 1 was given to the regular classes, the white students, and Algebra 2 Algebra 1 was those two other two in 1 year. So they had the Algebra 2, then they could take any other advanced courses that we offer, geometry. So they could get 4 or 5 different types of mathematics.
Right.
But black students weren't given that opportunity, but the Jewish kids were.
Wow.
So they had several points, but then some of them felt like they also should have the opportunity to play bongos in class. Have a bongo class and wear hats in school.
Oh, right.
And so it was a lot of different things that we had to fight.
Was there a dress code at that time?
Yes, you weren't allowed to wear a hat in school at the time. But then we had teachers, white teachers that came in that felt differently. They said it's not what's on your head, it's what's inside of your head. So they didn't care about whether or not kids wore hats or not. But once you give up one thing, you have to give up other things too.
So did the black kids have a more difficult time learning math, maybe based on the fact that in elementary or coming up, they didn't have great math teachers, or they just had inadequacy when it came to math as a science?
No, they were just not given the opportunities in certain schools. Because in elementary school, at Bishop Street School, when we started, all of us were in classes together. We had classes together. In the high school, they also didn't have that type of situation.
When you say classes together, what does that mean?
Blacks and whites were all together
Right.
at Bishop Street School.
Okay.
There was no, if you were in first grade, you were in first grade.
Right.
If you were in kindergarten, you were in kindergarten. So everybody was taught the same thing, you were there. And then of course, my mother was the one that taught me really math. This is 1 pinky. This is 2 pinky. This is 3 pinky. This is how many pinkies? 2, you know. So I learned from my mother, who was also pretty good at math. And same thing with the teachers in school. They had all of the curriculum. Everybody was written up at the end of the year, what they had achieved. Of course, you had grades from F, you had D, you had C, you had B, and you had A.
Right.
So the kids with F would stay back, right? And the others would go on. From D to A, would go on to school. So it wasn't that you didn't have the teaching.
So were the black kids more likely to get the F's and stay back and thus?
No.
Oh, okay.
We all moved together.
Okay. Even in New Haven?
If you look at that picture of my graduating from high school, not high school, but elementary school, you'll see all black the students.
I don't think I have that picture.
Mixed in.
Oh.
We all graduated at the same time.
Oh, okay. But was it that way in New Haven as well?
Yes, all the schools were that way in the beginning.
Oh, okay.
Until after the riots. After the riots, they asked for too many different things, and they ended up getting teachers that weren't doing the kind of job that they should do because they had more black kids. And then we had kids that were beginning to lack the discipline that they should have.
Were you an administrator in the school system? Or did you grow into an administrative post?
No, I'm just an administrative intern. And then I went from there to the Gifted and Talented.
Oh, okay.
They started the Gifted and Talented program. And in the gifted and talented program, I taught the science and the math. And I would go to different schools for each one.
Oh, okay.
And they would select what they call the gifted kids.
Were any of them black?
Yes,
Oh,
quite a
okay.
few,
Oh, okay.
quite a few.
And so while you were being a teacher, is that when you also opened up Dinkies?
No,
Okay.
I was playing in a band along with my,
This is the Dinky Band?
that was one of the dinky bands.
And who's in this band?
Well, I was playing the organ then at that time. This is a famous alto player, Godwin. This is another famous tenor player.
Tenor sax.
And of course we had a guitar player, well, also one of the top leading guitar players around today.
And you play organ and saxophone?
Saxophone, as you can see, I also play in band, saxophone.
Oh yeah. It's a nice looking picture of you. Yeah. And so your club had a jazz component to it, right?
Well, after I retired from the school system,
Uh-huh.
I opened a club called Dinkies
Oh. In New Haven.
in New Haven.
And how did it go?
It was one of the most successful clubs around at that time. We had musicians from New York, New Jersey. I had a regular organ player that came in and played the organ.
You had a Hammond.
a Hammond organ. And of course, being an owner, I couldn't play because you always have to watch
Right.
forgiveness. So, but it was very successful.
Wow.
We had people from all over coming in.
Is that where your wife ran the bar with you or the restaurant with you,
Right.
the club with you?
Right?
How did you meet her?
I met her at a dance. I was playing at a dance, and she came up. She said, "You sound like a record that she had, a person that she enjoyed listening to." And so I began talking to her, and then she would come to all the other dances that I played, and so we fell in love.
Is she from Connecticut?
Yeah, well, not originally, but she lived in New Britain, Connecticut.
Oh, okay.
And she was the first black worker in the employment office in Connecticut.
Oh, okay.
She was the first black one in New Britain.
Wow.
And so we were married in New Britain, her hometown.
Oh, nice. And then you moved to Branford?
Yes, after we got together and everything, and she had a job, offered a job in New Haven. And so the place I could find was Branford. So I moved here to Branford.
Now, Branford had a factory and it was hiring a lot of blacks, and it was also giving them an opportunity to move into some of the housing that they built.
Right.
And is that how blacks really came to?
As far as I know, yes. They were Malibu Iron, a lot came up for that, and they had housing on certain streets for them to purchase and work at the same time.
If you could change anything in your life, what would you like to have changed or been able to change?
Well, I wouldn't want to change the education that I received. And I wouldn't want to exchange any of the experiences because I would have never met my wife at that time. I met her by being a musician.
Right.
And all the different people that I had met during all those years in college and all the experiences I had as a owner of a club, hundreds and hundreds of people. and then going to our church at the same time.
Right.
Mount Olive, Zion,
Right.
all those years, and then moving to Branford and being here
Right.
for over 50 years. So I don't regret any of the time that I spent doing anything.
What message would you like to leave for your family in Waterbury, your grandchildren, your son or daughter? Is there a message you want to just shout out to them before we conclude this session?
I think my religion had more to do with it than anything else. Doing some of the things that I learned when I was 2 years old. I was in what they call the Buds of Promise.
Yes, yes.
That was one of the Methodist churches thing, the Buds of Promise. I learned how to read the Bible. I learned how to recite some of the things in the Bible, because that was one of the things we did at the Buds of Promise.
Yes.
And if you didn't know one of the ones, and the easiest one is what Jesus said.
Jesus wept.
Jesus wept.
Everybody loved that one.
Jesus wept. So I think that the most I can tell people that religion and believing in God and people and trying to help people with all the experiences that I could possibly get.
And this is what year are you now?
I am 92 years old.
92 years young. Awesome, awesome. And you still get around. You still play the organ. You
Still play saxophone,
and the sax. Yeah. And you are definitely a faithful member here. You were on the trustee board here. You try to teach members here how to play the piccolo, to teach them music. Tonette. All right. And we're just so happy, Mr. Johnson, that you were able to stop and just give us this portion of your life that I think will be an inspiration to others when they hear it.
Thank you.